Hi, this is Waylon from Swiftwood Bows. Let's talk about some basic hand tools that we can use for making a bow. Everybody has their own kind of definition of what's essential for bow making. Of course, it's possible to make a bow from only stone tools. It's possible to make a bow from just using a hatchet or a knife. But for most of us, we like to have a wide variety of tools at our disposal. So I'm just going to talk about some of the simple hand tools that I use every day making bows. Let's start down here with the basic roughing out tools. I typically start with a good sharp hatchet. It makes quick work of a stave to getting it roughed out into its basic bow shape. Of course, there's a lot of guys that use bandsaws. I've got one. I make a lot of bows, and in the long run, that bandsaw is going to save me a lot of time and a lot of wear and tear on my joints for cutting staves down and roughing out bows. But honestly, I don't use it on every bow. Haven't used it on the last several bows that I've made unless I've got a lot of material that I need to remove just to get down to a basic bow shape. I'm happy to just use a hatchet. And then once I'm done with my hatchet work, the draw knife is my go-to tool. The draw knife can do a lot of work. It's good for quick removal, and with a little bit of practice you can be quite precise at it. You just have to watch out for tearing out the grain or hitting knots and splitting out the wood. But I'd say it's a pretty essential tool for most people who make bows. You certainly won't be sorry to get one. The next tool that I find myself using is farrier's rasp. It's a very sharp, aggressive rasp. It has a coarse side and a fine side for smoothing things out. They're used for preparing hooves for horseshoes by farriers, hence the name. And if you know some farriers in your area, they can be a good source for used farriers' rasps. I think they might have a little higher standard for how sharp they need their rasps, and so it's not too hard to find discarded rasps that are perfectly fine for our needs. Though of course you can buy them new and they are wicked sharp, so please be careful. They will tear up your hands quick if you're not being mindful while you're using it. But I use the farrier's rasp for a lot. I use it for kind of early wood removal when I'm done with the draw knife, just kind of getting things down and even and removing some material to get the bow to start bending. But I've found myself using this for actually a lot of precision things as well. Having such a big flat blade could actually be really stable and give you a lot of control when you're removing wood in certain situations. I even use it for doing tip overlays and that sort of thing, believe it or not. So for me, the farrier's rasp is a very essential tool. Next, I think it's a good idea to have some kind of half-round rasp and file. You know, this is a pretty junky, cheapo one. You certainly could do better. Like a nice Nicholson's would definitely be better. I haven't found the need to upgrade. I don't use the coarse side very much. I pretty much just use this fine half-round side for getting into doing contours. Obviously, this big flat farrier's rasp isn't very good for tight spaces and contours, so it's nice to have something a little bit more refined to get in there and make some shapes and clean up some edges. And another tool that I use for doing contours, often shaping the handle, is one area that I'll use it. It's this microplane. It's not too dissimilar from the Sureforms. I find that it does a better job. Works really well on certain types of wood like vine maple that are really stringy, that can often clog up the rasps. So I don't use this a lot, but in certain situations it can be very handy. I certainly wouldn't call it essential. Next we have the card scraper, which is a pretty essential tool for final tillering work once you've got the bow roughed down and bending like you want it. You want to be a little bit more controlled about how you're removing the wood from the bow, and the scraper here gives you that control. Use it for taking long pulls off the bow wood. When I get the general shape that I want, I'll start counting my strokes, doing 30 strokes on this side, turn the bow around, 30 strokes on the other side to keep the wood removal even. The other nice thing about the card scraper is that it kind of cleans up as it goes. It's really good for getting rid of the tool marks from the rasps and leaving a pretty smooth surface so that you get down to the final sanding. There's really not much to do. And another, it's called a gooseneck scraper. I don't use this as much. I use it if there's little tight spaces I need to get into, dips in the back on an osage that I need to clean out, or if I'm doing a hollow limb design, I'll do my tillering with this. This is a hollow limb bow that I've been working on, and you can see fits right down there in the groove. Not essential, but can be handy in certain situations. If you're using scrapers, you're going to want some kind of mill file for putting an edge on the scrapers. Also good for just cleaning up some light tool marks on the bow from time to time. To do your string knocks, you're going to have some sort of little round file. This is just a chainsaw file. It works fine. It's maybe a little bit wider diameter than would be ideal, but it's fine for the job. There's all kinds of little rat tail files and such that will work as well. And I got this little box of assorted small files. I typically use these for cleaning up the tip overlays. Not an essential tool, but one that I find handy on some stage on most bows that I make. And then once you've got the bow all tillered just like you want it, you're going to need some sandpaper to make it all smooth and pretty. I rarely need 100 grit or coarser. As I said, the scraper gets things pretty clean. I don't really have any heavy tool marks by the time I get to the sanding place, so I typically go from 150 to 220 to 320. You don't really need to go much further than 320 in my opinion. You won't really notice the difference once you get the finish on there, and some people think that it even makes it a little harder for the finish to stick if you get it polished down like glass before you put the finish on. I don't know if that's true or not, but I just haven't found it necessary to really go past 320. Not a big fan of burnishing wood. I'm suspicious that it only compromises the integrity of the wood cells a little bit by crushing them down. I don't have any evidence to back that up. It's just my gut feeling, but I don't find it necessary. And then just a few kind of incidental tools here that I think are pretty essential. Hopefully you'll have some of them just laying around anyway. Having a ruler to measure out the initial layout of the bow along with a tape measure is really handy. And I almost always find uses for some clamps during the process. It might be handy to pick up one or two of those. Maybe not essential, but that gets us onto the next point of you need something to hold the bow still with. This is a Stave Master that's designed by Keenan Howard. and it's an excellent piece of equipment. I use it every day, and I can do all kinds of things with the bow making process with it. Here, let me turn the camera a little bit so you can see it better. So I certainly don't think that a beginner bowyer needs something like this. It's a bit of an investment. If you're planning on making lots of bows, I highly recommend it, but there are plenty of other options. A lot of guys use bench vices to secure their bow. There's a product called a stave press, which is a really nice way of holding your bow still to work. When I got started, all I had was some clamps and a countertop in my kitchen. My wife wasn't too thrilled about that. We made it work for a while. She was a good sport, but then I got one of these and she was much happier. But my point is that when you get started, you can use a variety of ways. All you need to do is hold the bow down tight and have access to the belly to work on it. I know some guys will clamp their bow down to the railing on a deck. That can work. You just got to make sure that you're not damaging the wood by clamping it down to something that's hard or has sharp edges. But you can get creative with that aspect. You can also build your own shave horse. I mean, that's essentially what this is a specialized shave horse. But there's no reason that you can't build one from some lumber, and there's plenty of plans for that online. So just get creative, and it's not too hard to find a way to hold down your bow. Well, I hope that was helpful. Hope I covered all the basics. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. I'm happy to answer them. But hopefully that should get you started. Good luck.